Hi, everyone. It's 11:20 on my clock. Why don't we, David, do you want to take a roll call to make sure everyone's back?
Yes, I can do that. I just want to make sure that we've continued recording before I proceed.
Yes, the recording is still running.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to call the roll and just let us know if you're here when I call your name. John Harabedian,
I'm here.
Ruben Osorio,
I'm here.
Yongping Chen,
I'm back.
Francisco Kim,
Here.
Shudong Li.
Present. I'm here.
Thank you. And Dr. Mateki.
Yes, here.
President Harabedian, I show 6 members present. We continue to have a quorum.
Great, thanks, David. We're going to move on to item number 12. It's a report from the licensing committee on their hearing and meeting yesterday. Dr. Mateki?
Yes, President Harabedian, and thank you everyone for give the committee a chance to present yesterday, work with the public and the stakeholder, also board staff has done a wonderful, thorough job in discussion on the minimal hours, instruction of the curriculum, subject areas related to the herbs, and also Qigong, Tai Chi exercise, therapies for pain management. On the herbs, the safety is brought out on the public and stakeholder and also board members. So the license committee voted to approve recommending the full board discussion on this item and also recommending that's the board call for a stakeholder meeting where stakeholders can submit documentation for recommended changes to herbal curriculum requirements for the board to review. Also, there were questions come out regarding the tutorial requirement. I think, probably we want to address developing for the training program curriculum first, and for the board to adjust to the tutorial requirement later. So there is just those discussions. So I don't want to confuse everyone, but the committee voted to approve the recommending to the full board to discuss the items, and also recommending the board call for a stakeholder meeting.
Great.
So my report is finished. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. And if Francisco, would you like to say anything about the meeting as well?
Oh, yes, this is Member Kim. I want to add that the herbal medicine practice is getting more popular. And also, according to this analysis report, there's more importance has been proved. So it's not just the practitioners using more herbs, but also more, I think, people, public is demanding more on this herbal medicine. So I try to propose to have a stakeholders meeting so that all the stakeholders can come in and come up with a certain kind of herbal specialist certificate program to be recognized by the public and the other, so that was my suggestion. and then I would like to discuss this in this full board meeting.
Great. Well, thank you to you both. It was a long meeting with a lot of items for consideration. Thank you for staff. And I do see Dr. Chen, you have your hand up. So would you like to make a comment or ask a question?
Yes, Mr. President. Yesterday, the committee meeting was a wonderful committee meeting. A lot of fruitful input, information, commentary from the public, from the board member, including schools, association, licensees, even patients. So it was a very good discussion, and first of all, I agree the committee's recommendation of holding a future stakeholder meeting to further discussion of the use of herbal and Tai Chi Qigong exercise. So look back, we have this item discussed because since last year, March, June, August, all the meeting we have had, the stakeholder came up to the board, talk about how the pandemic affect this profession, while the acupuncture modality is difficult to deliver to the patient in a lot of circumstances. The herbal was available for treating the symptom of pandemic and now post-pandemic symptom. My own experience in my clinic, I treat dozens of the COVID patients, their symptom, and now really, really busy with a lot of post-COVID symptoms like brain fog, insomnia, anxiety, fatigue, and the Western medicine does not have a sound solution for those symptoms. And the patient after COVID, 6 months, even over a year, they're still suffering. Yeah, so also a lot of balance problem. They couldn't go back to work. Tinnitus, hearing loss. So the inflammation from the virus or from the immune reaction really, really is become to be people call long haulers. So I see those patients, they need herbal medicine. The Chinese medicine can play a role. So I saw the need from the consumer. They really try to find the second solution when they couldn't find from their own MDs, or they came out from hospital, or they don't want to go to the hospital. Anyway, so the consumer's need is initiation for the stakeholder to come to the board. And we as board member, we sense that, and it's very necessary to have this topic to be openly discussed. So we, as board, we oversee the school, the licensees, to see our education, the herbal education is enough to ensure the minimum competency and the safety. So this discuss is going on, and I'm glad to see that. So that's my comment. Thank you, Harabidian.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. Any other comments from board members before we open it up for public comment? Great, let's open it up for public comment.
And this is the moderator. We're opening the Q&A feature of WebEx in case anyone has any comments on the report from the licensing committee meeting. If you do have a comment, you can locate the Q&A icon, which is a question mark inside a square at the lower right of your WebEx screen, and type the word comment and hit send. If you're on a mobile device, the Q&A icon is behind the 3-dot other options. We do have a request for comment from Lei Zhang. And Lei, I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. You'll have 3 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning. And if you are on your phone or a mobile device, you might need to hit *6 to unmute yourself. And you should have gotten a box pop up on your screen asking to say unmute yourself. And you can say unmute me. And I realize it's possible that Lei was hoping to speak on the previous topic because the comment request came in at 10:59. Lei is not available, and I see no other requests for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A feature?
Sure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't believe this needs any more discussion, so we'll move on to item number 13, presentation on informed consent practices and other healing arts boards. And I do
Point of order, President Herbedian.
Yes.
There was a recommendation to to call for a stakeholder meeting. Do we want to go ahead and do that?
Sorry. Yeah, let's go back to item number 12. Sorry.
Yeah, I can repeat. Sorry, this is a member Mateki, President. May I?
Yes, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just, maybe earlier I was speaking a few things. So the licensing committee voted to approve recommending that the full board discuss the items, which we did. But also we recommending the board call for a stakeholder meeting where the stakeholder can submit documentation for recommendation changes to herbal curriculum requirements for the board to review.
Got it. Yes, you did mention that. And are we allowed to, Fred, Chen-Yu, are we allowed to kind of, as a board, vote to approve that stakeholder meeting for a future date? Or do we somehow need to agendize that for a future discussion to then agendize the stakeholder meeting?
Good morning, Mr. President. Fred Chen, UDCA Legal Counsel. No, I think it's fine because that was part of the agenda item, is
Great.
the recommendation from the licensing committee. So yeah, I think it's fine to have a motion on the floor and vote on it.
Perfect. All right, thanks, Fred. Well, Dr. Mateki moved. I think that was a formal motion. And do I have a second for that?
I'm a second. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
We have Shudong with a second, but just to confirm, I don't believe I heard Dr. Mateki say exercise therapy as well. Should we include both of those or just the herbal?
Yes, both of them. Sorry. You
And-
want to repeat or you want to repeat that one? Which you wanted me to repeat it?
The motion on the table now is with both herbal and exercise therapy. Shudong, member Shudong Lee, is that okay?
Yes, I'm second. Yeah, I
Okay.
second.
Thank you.
Thank you. Open it up for public comment.
Correct.
Thank you.
And I think, can we, just to be safe, there you go. I think we're going to open up for public comment. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So this is the moderator. We have again opened for public comment on the motion on the floor about a public meeting. If you have any desire to comment on that issue, please let it use the Q&A feature. We do have a request from Ron Zaidman. Ron, I will send you a request to unmute yourself, and you will have 3 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning.
Thank you, Ron Zeidman, Five Branches University. Yes, as was discussed in the licensing committee, the invitation to have a stakeholder meeting and input from the practitioners and the schools on these two very important subjects is very welcome. And we look forward to participating, not only by submitting letters, but also we appreciate when there's and now of course it would be a Zoom meeting where we can exchange ideas and arrive at conclusions. That we've done that with other previous stakeholder meetings, and it's been very productive. Thank you.
And our next request for comment comes from Neil Miller. Neil, I will send a request to unmute your microphone, and you will have 3 minutes with 30-second warning.
Neil Miller from Cal ATMA. I have a question regarding whether or not you have any idea whether or not this meeting will be live or if it will be a real Zoom meeting or one like this where you can't really see one another. It's very difficult to try to communicate when you have 3 minutes on subjects that take a little bit more in-depth input from the public. I'm hoping that the stakeholders meeting will be structured as such that participants won't feel rushed and that ideas will just, instead of being really discussed and worked on, that you'll just get sound bites in 3 minutes and it won't be a real interactive affair. And so I think that in structuring this, I hope that it will be much more interactive as opposed to just making comment, that there will be more questions and discussion between the profession, the consumers, and the board. Thank you.
And I see no other requests for public comment. Shall I close the feature?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. So I believe we have a motion and a second. David, do you want to conduct a roll call, please?
Of course. So as I call your name, please let us know whether you support aye or oppose no or abstain from the motion to hold the stakeholder meeting on the topics of the curriculum requirements for herbs and for exercise therapy. John Harabedian.
Aye.
Ruben Osorio.
Aye.
Yongping Chen.
Yes, I support.
Francisco Kim. Member Kim, I still show you as muted.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. What is your vote?
Okay. Oh, aye.
Thank you. Shudong Li
I support.
and Dr. Mateki.
Aye.
Thank you. President Harabedian, I show the motion passes by a vote of 6-0.
Great. Thanks, David. And thank you again, Dr. Mateki and Francisco, for all the work on that. We can now move on to item number 13.
Thank you, President Harabedian. Item 13 is a presentation on informed consent practices and other healing arts boards. This item was requested by our Vice President, Ruben Osorio, and will be presented by our policy analyst, David Brueggemann. David?
Thank you, Ben. And so as indicated, we had requests to conduct some research on the topic of informed consent, and specifically we're concerned with how some of the other healing arts boards at the state handle informed consent in the context of medical treatment. So we would not be discussing other instances of informed consent, such as research studies, for instance. So in your meeting materials, under tab 13, we have a memo that I'm going to review. If you're looking at the electronic version of our meeting book, which is available online through our website, the memo starts on page 238. So I'll give everybody just a second to get to the material. And I also would like to note that the memo is a joint effort. Both Christine Brothers, our policy coordinator, and I worked on this material. So we took a review of a few of the different boards in their requirements for informed consent for medical treatment, seeing whether or not that they had forms available and whether or not there were specific references in laws and regulations regarding this type of informed consent. And we looked at the following license types. Besides, of course, acupuncturists, we considered physicians and surgeons, osteopaths, chiropractors, physician's assistants, registered nurses, nurse practitioners, nurse midwives, physical therapists, massage therapists, and naturopaths. And I'd just like to note that of those, technically speaking, massage therapists are certificate holders. They are not licensees, as the regulations for massage therapists are voluntary in terms of certification. But we felt it was a relevant field to review. Just as a little bit of background, California courts have weighed in on informed consent for medical treatment. In the case of Cobbs versus Grant, the California Supreme Court ruled that a patient must receive sufficient information to make a meaningful decision. Informed consent is defined in the Judicial Council of California Civil Jury Instruction 532 as follows. A patient gives informed consent only after the, whichever type of medical practitioner applies, has adequately explained the proposed treatment or procedure. And as you're going through the California laws, you'll see that there are several laws that address specific medical procedures. These would include the treatment of breast cancer, the use of silicone implants, collagen injections, the transfer of sperm or ova, blood transfusions, the pelvic examination of an unconscious patient, and the donation of organs, tissues, and/or bodily fluids. In those situations, the laws typically will just mention requiring informed consent without describing a form or listing specific requirements. Now, there can be exceptions where the laws will indicate provisions that must be included within that kind of informed consent. In these situations, the patient may be required to be given a written document that outlines the procedure involved and the associated risks. In these instances, the laws are written so that providing the document is not explicitly considered as a substitute for informed consent, but that document could help ensure that a patient can give informed consent for the relevant treatments. Business and Professions Code section 2290.5 subsection B requires that healthcare providers offering telehealth to inform patients of the provision of telehealth services and to obtain written or verbal consent from the patient. And as we go through the specific licensee populations, we found that there are three general categories for the informed consent laws or regulations that apply. In one category, you're going to see instances of general guidance and best practices. Typically, this is in primary care situations. As I've mentioned before, there's another category where there are specific procedures, and in certain instances, these requirements are delegated to other license types. And then finally, there are laws about informed consent that are specific to instances where supervision is involved or that trainees are involved in the provision of treatment. Before I get into specific license types, are there any questions from board members?
I don't have any, but I know that Ruben, this was an item that you had recommended for discussion. So do you have any specific questions at this point?
No, I don't.
All right, then. I'll continue. So the medical board handles the licensing for physicians and surgeons, and in California, this is one category of licensure. It also handles licensing for midwives, polysomnographic trainees, technicians, and technologists, basically the people that you would deal with primarily if you're going for a sleep study, research psychoanalysts, and student research psychoanalysts. Now, the regulations require that polysomnographic licensees must be supervised by physicians or surgeons, and we found that the research psychoanalyst regulations do not address informed consent in any way whatsoever. So I'm only going to talk about the licensees, the physicians and surgeons, and the midwives and their requirements for informed consent. For physicians and surgeons, this is in the category of general guidance or best practices. We're finding references in publications such as the Guide to Laws Governing the Practice of Medicine by Physicians and Surgeons, which addresses informed consent in the context of the prescription and use of controlled substances for pain management. I'm quoting from that particular guide. The physician and surgeon should discuss the risks and benefits of the use of controlled substances and other treatment modalities with the patient, caregiver, or guardian. The guide does not require the informed consent to be in writing, but it does suggest that it would help in documenting treatment. And as before, there are several procedures for which California law explicitly requires physicians to obtain informed consent. I've addressed some of them earlier. Others include alternative treatment options for breast cancer, alternative prostate cancer treatment options, the pelvic exams that I mentioned on unconscious female patients, hysterectomies, sterilizations, prescribing, ordering, or reordering an antipsychotic for a resident of a care facility, and treatments with dimethyl sulfoxide. In some situations, physicians and surgeons are required to provide a publication, I touched on this before, that summarizes or otherwise discusses the risks and benefits of the procedures that are involved. This would not appear to substitute for informed consent, but it would be a legally required part of that discussion for informed consent. I'm going to move on to the Osteopathic Board. There are no laws or regulations specific to osteopaths dealing with informed consent. Both the Osteopathic Medical Board and the California Medical Board reference the same sections of California law on their websites. And this may be a function of the California law that says in part, it is the policy of this state that holders of MD degrees and DO degrees shall be accorded equal professional status and privileges as licensed physicians and surgeons. So I take this to mean that it may be reasonable to assume that osteopaths would have similar obligations with respect to informed consent as physicians and surgeons do. So much like the medical board with respect to physicians and surgeons, there's no detailed guidance on informed consent and osteopaths given by the Osteopathic Board. To talk about the Chiropractic Board now, there's a specific section of California Regulations 16 CCR Section 318. It's titled Chiropractic Patient Records Accountable Billings. Subsection A7 of that section notes that chiropractic patient records must include signed, written, informed consent as specified in Section 319.1. And that section is titled Informed Consent. Subsection A reads in part that a licensed doctor of chiropractic shall verbally and in writing inform each patient of the material risks of proposed care. Material shall be defined as a procedure inherently involving known risk of serious bodily harm. The chiropractor shall obtain the patient's written informed consent prior to initiating clinical care. The signed written consent shall become part of the patient's record. Now, there's no reference in chiropractic board laws and regulations for what should be in an informed consent document, nor is there a specific form described for such a document. Just like to take a moment and see if there are any questions from board members before I continue.
Any questions? Great, go ahead, David.
Thank you. So for the Physician's Assistant Board, physician's assistants are required to have a supervising physician available in person or by electronic communication at all times when they are caring for patients. The supervising physician may adopt protocols to govern the performance of a physician's assistant for some or all tasks. At a minimum, the protocol shall include that the physician assistant provide education to the patient and shall state the information to be given the patient, the nature of the consent to be obtained from the patient, the preparation and technique of the procedure, and the follow-up care. In an approved preceptorship, which is a type of supervised clinical practice, trainees are required to inform a patient of the services that will be rendered by the trainee, except for in emergencies. In cases where a trainee will assist in a surgical procedure, again, except emergencies, the patient is required to consent in writing to the patient receiving care from a trainee prior to the performance of surgery. It is the responsibility of the approved program to assure the instructors or physician preceptors have obtained necessary consent. Physician's assistants, in conjunction with physicians and registered nurses, are required to include patient education, instruction, and informed consent when reviewing the issues surrounding the use of laser or intense light pulses for elective cosmetic procedures. I'm going to go on to cover midwives. Now, there's under California law, there's two broad categories of midwives. There's just licensed midwives, and there's licensed certified nurse midwives. I'll get to that second category in just a moment. The midwives are going to be more limited in their scope of practice compared to certified nurse midwives. They're limited per Business Professions Codes Section 2507 to attending cases of normal pregnancy and childbirth, and to provide prenatal, intrapartum, and postpartum care, including family planning care for the mother and immediate care for the newborn. Licensed midwives must disclose the following to prospective clients and obtain their informed consent for all of the following. First is the provision of Business Profession Codes Section 2507. This describes what qualifies as a normal pregnancy and childbirth. They're also required to disclose that the client is retaining a licensed midwife and not a certified nurse midwife, and that the licensed midwife is not supervised by a physician and surgeon. Disclosure includes the midwife's current licensure status and license number, the practice settings in which the licensed midwife practices, whether or not he or she has liability coverage for the practice of midwifery, the fact that many physicians do not have liability insurance coverage for services provided to someone having a planned out-of-hospital birth, and acknowledgement that if the client is advised to consult with a physician, failure to do so may affect the client's legal rights in any professional negligence actions against a physician, licensed healthcare professional, or hospital. This continues on the next page. The disclosure also requires noting that there are conditions that are outside the scope of practice of a licensed midwife that will result in a referral for a consultation from or transfer of care to a physician. Also disclosing the specific arrangements for the transfer of care during the prenatal period, hospital transfer during the intrapartum and postpartum periods, and access to appropriate emergency medical services for mother and baby if necessary, and recommendations for pre-registration at a hospital that has obstetric emergency services and is most likely to receive the transfer. Must also disclose if during the course of care the client is informed that she has or may have a condition indicating the need for a mandatory transfer, the licensed midwife must initiate the transfer. The laws regulating licensed midwifery practices and the procedure reporting complaints to the Medical Board of California must be disclosed, and that these items are available on the Medical Board of California's website. Disclosure also includes consultation with a physician does not alone create a physician-patient relationship or any other relationship with the physician. The informed consent must specifically state that the licensed midwife and the consulting physician are not employees, partners, associates, agents, or principals of one another. The licensed midwife must inform the patient that he or she is independently licensed and practicing midwifery, and in that regard is solely responsible for the services he or she provides. The disclosure and consent form has to be signed by both the licensed midwife and the client, and there is a sample form on the medical board website that complies with those requirements. There are additional obligations when for informed consent for a patient who has previously had a C-section but otherwise meets the criteria for treatment set forth in Standard of Care for California licensed midwives. Such written informed consent, in addition to what I've already discussed, must include the following: the current statement by the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists regarding its recommendations for vaginal birth after cesarean section, or VBAC, a description of the licensed midwife's level of clinical experience and history with VBACs, and any advanced training or education in the clinical management of VBACs. It includes a list of educational materials provided to the client and the client's agreement to provide a copy of the dictated operative report regarding the prior C-section, permit increased monitoring, and, upon request of the midwife, transfer to a hospital at any time or if labor does not unfold in a normal manner. Finally, this additional disclosure must include a detailed description of the material risks and benefits of VBAC and elective repeat C-section. Now, I'm going to shift from here to discussing the licensees covered by the Board of Registered Nursing, which includes nurse midwives. But more fundamentally, the foundational license for the board is as a registered nurse. If you have any kind of advanced practice license, including as a certified nurse midwife, that's above and beyond your license as a registered nurse. So the registered nurses, as discussed in 16 California CCR section 1443.5, describes standards of competence. And one of them addresses informed consent, although it isn't mentioned specifically by that name. In that case, this standard 6, the nurse must act as the client's advocate as circumstances require by initiating action to improve health care or to change decisions or activities which are against the interests or wishes of the client, and by giving the client the opportunity to make informed decisions about health care before it is provided. Registered nurses are not required to take informed consent directly, but do need to ensure that such consent has been covered by the supervising physician and surgeon. There is no general procedure or form for informed consent taken by registered nurses of any category that we found in statute or regulation. It could be the case that the healthcare facility where the registered nurse works has policies in place that cover informed consent. In those circumstances, a registered nurse could take informed consent if they follow what is called a standardized procedure. This is a form procedure established by the nurse, the supervising physician, and the healthcare organization, and they would be required to have on file documentation of these standardized procedures. So generally speaking, both nurse practitioners and certified nurse midwives are permitted to take informed consent for blood transfusions. There's a specific section of code allowing this. And then the certified nurse midwives, compared to licensed midwives, are under the supervision of a physician and surgeon, but that person does not have to be physically present. Certified nurse midwives must disclose the following items orally and in writing and obtain informed consent from their patients unless the intended site of birth is the hospital setting. And those criteria are as follows. The patient is retaining a certified nurse midwife, and the certified nurse midwife is not supervised by a physician and surgeon. The certified nurse midwife's current licensure status and license number, the practice settings in which the certified nurse midwife practices. If the certified nurse midwife does not have liability coverage for the practice of midwifery, the certified nurse midwife shall disclose that fact. There are conditions that are outside, disclosing whether there are conditions that are outside of the scope of practice of a certified nurse midwife that will result in a referral for a consultation from or transfer of care to a physician and surgeon. The specific arrangements for the referral of complications to a physician and surgeon for consultation. The certified nurse midwife shall not be required to identify a specific physician and surgeon. The specific arrangements for the transfer of care during the prenatal period, hospital transfer during the intrapartum and postpartum periods, and access to appropriate emergency medical services for mother and baby if necessary, and recommendations for pre-registration at a hospital that has obstetric emergency services and is most likely to receive the transfer. If during the course of care the patient is informed that the patient has or may have a condition indicating the need for a mandatory transfer, the certified nurse midwife shall initiate that transfer. The availability of the text of laws regulating certified nurse midwifery practices and the procedure for reporting complaints to the Board of Registered Nursing, and those may be found on the Board of Registering Nursing's internet website. And finally, must disclose consultation with a physician and surgeon does not alone create a physician-patient relationship or any other relationship with the physician and surgeon. The certified nurse midwife shall inform the patient that certified nurse midwife is independently licensed and practicing midwifery, and in that regard is solely responsible for the services the certified nurse midwife provides. So both the nurse midwife and the patient have to sign this disclosure and consent form. The Nurse Midwifery Advisory Committee, which is part of the Board of Registered Nursing, they may recommend to the board the form for the written disclosure and informed consent statement required to be used. But unlike with licensed midwives, there does not appear to be a sample form available from that board. And at this point, just like to take another moment to see if there are any questions from board members.
Thanks, David. Yeah, let's see if there are any questions. And just for our planning purposes, how much more do you have to give in your presentation?
I've got 3 more pages. I'd anticipate 5 minutes.
Great. Any questions before David concludes his presentation? Great, go ahead, David.
Thank you. Moving on to physical therapists. Business and Professions Code, section 2660.1 is the only law that refers to informed consent for physical therapists. It stipulates that a client is not able to provide informed consent for sexual activity with a licensed physical therapist that would violate Business and Professions Code, section 726. Publication by the board in their progress notes, it addressed informed consent in the winter 2017 issue. It noted that informed consent is not required by the Physical Therapy Act, but from an ethical and professional perspective, informed consent is considered a best practice. The APTA Guide for Professional Conduct states that physical therapists shall provide the information necessary to allow patients or their surrogates to make informed decisions about physical therapy care or participation in clinical research. And addressing massage therapists, again, this profession is not regulated in the same way. They are not licensees. They are certificate holders, and their certification is voluntary. The main benefit is that it allows certificate holders to practice without having to comply with a variety of different local rules and regulations. The Massage Therapy Act has a single mention of consent. Business and Profession Code, section 4609, section A1F, considers massage of female breasts to be unprofessional conduct for certificate holder or applicant unless the recipient provides written consent and has a referral from a licensed California healthcare provider. So the Naturopathic Board, they have one reference in regulations, that's section 4232 of California Code of Regulations. It's narrow. It applies only to students in approved naturopathic schools and to those who hold a certificate of registration with the board rather than a license. People in either category must inform a patient that they are receiving treatment from someone that is in one of those categories rather than a licensed naturopath. Those receiving treatment from students must be informed and consent in writing. There are no references to informed consent forms in laws or regulations for naturopaths. And finally, our regulations and laws for acupuncturists. They're found only in the regulations concerning acupuncture tutorials. To comply with section 1399.425G of our regulations, trainees are required to obtain consent from the patients before treatments are provided. It says that the acupuncture services provided by the trainee shall be done so in a manner which does not endanger the health and welfare of patients receiving such services. No trainee shall render acupuncture services to any patient unless the patient has been informed that such services will be rendered by that trainee. The patient on each occasion of treatment shall be informed of the procedure to be performed by the trainee under the supervision of the supervising acupuncturist and have consented in writing prior to performance of that treatment. Those requirements also are going to be applied in instances where the trainee is to assist the supervisor. Supervisors are responsible for ensuring informed consent is obtained whenever appropriate, and both the trainee and their supervisor could have their registration disciplined for failing to comply with those informed consent regulations. There's no reference in acupuncture board laws and regulations for what should be in an informed consent document, nor do we have a specific form described in regulations. And just as a final note, I'm just going to end it right there to see if there are any other additional questions from the board.
Great, thank you. And if you are done, David, then I will kind of defer back to Ruben to kind of kick off with any questions or comments, considering this was an item that he wanted to be brought forward.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time and all the effort that you put into it. Yeah, one of the main reasons is every year acupuncturists have to surrender the license due to many of these cases have to be involved um, from very different reasons, and it is basically the reason why I think we should bring this into the board to prevent, and as well as the public from being victims of many of the circumstances that are have been described and brought up. And it's going to be for the benefit of both the acupuncturist and also the patient. And again, thank you, Dave, for the time and all the effort that you guys put into it. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ruben. And any other board members with a question or a comment?
This is Member Kim. I've been using consent form for every single patient since I practiced, and of course, some of the legalizing or more of the regulatory supervision will help and prevent any unfortunate events, but I don't know how much it'll help in terms of preventing and also inform the consumers about these incidents, any legality, because I do see the more of importance on this ethics part from the occupational analysis has been increased. So yeah, we can discuss on whether how we proceed with this issue or not.
This is Member Chen. May I speak?
Please, go ahead.
Thank you. So to Francisco, to Member Kim, you are the male practitioner, I'm the female practitioner. For me, I really don't have the problem with patients. Try to be careful. But for you, I wonder, in your practice, if you examine the patient, do you have like a secretary assistant accompany you if you need to do some examination? The female patient will feel it's like a private. Do you have help? I just like to know how the male acupuncture conduct the examination of treatment when you feel the patient is concerning?
Yeah, of course. I have a staff I can accompany, but not all the cases. Only if the patient or this maybe circumstances is not comfortable for the patient. Yes, then I do have a help with my staff. But otherwise, so it's more like ethical or for patients, not just legal protection or what, it's just for the courtesy for the patient. So that based on that, I make the decision.
Okay, so if the male acupuncturist does not have help only by themselves, what can they do?
I think you're gonna have to, in different circumstances. So you're gonna have to make a call, especially for the protection of yourself and for the patient, and also it should be based on the professional ethics, and or other these regulatory requirements. So
yeah, I just like to know if this is required to have the third party to present. Is it required, as you know?
This is Fred Chan, UDC Legal Counsel. The topic for discussion now is regarding informed consent, right? So while I understand that informed consent is related to a licensee's practice, however, I think that right now the direction of the questions is veering away from the informed consent issue. So let's bring this back, okay?
Actually, thank you, Legal Chen Yu. Actually, it's related. If just happen the male puncturist does not have the third party to present there, maybe he should have some specific consent, written consent to give to the patient. That's my point, actually.
So,
Okay, that's good. Okay.
yeah,
Dr.
this is
McKay?
the member. Yeah, thank you, President. I think I just wanted to see when read the material and listen the presentation, and thank you, Member Osorio, brought this to attention. It is indeed, when we look at the cases come to us, informed consent as it become a part. Could the licensees inform the patients differently or better? The ways can avoid it a lot later on, legal issues. But I wanted to just see, as a physician side also, is how this is being done. I think throughout, the presentation here, David, have to really thank you for went extensively look at this. You become the expert in the professional side of it to present all the legal and informed consent, so much detail. But I wanted to see is a lot was done is because the stakeholder, the licensees, associations, so they formed a standard, of a care and also the consent, and then they bring, help bring to the board. So here, I think with the acupuncture board, how the stakeholder associations probably need work on this if they strongly want to protect the public. So let's see how I do it is every 6 months, because this is just the hospital guideline, and every 6 months we update our consent form, which is an informed consent form. And every documentation. Every note I will have there is like a patient verbal consented with acupuncture treatment. And every time you will ask the patients, and also if a patient did not agree with you, how can you do the acupuncture treatment, right? So I'm just trying to see is I hear with legal Mr. Cha Yu is mentioned is sometimes this is a fine line here is for the board. We have to see how we can work with the stakeholders, and we not the expert, to set up the standard, how to written the consent forms. But we can see how other board did, which we saw this, but other boards all work with their stakeholders and to put the standard of care into place. I just want to edit, I think this is a very impressive presentation from the staff, went through the detail. And also I hope the stakeholders, associations, all the leaders in this field to take on those informations, see how they can work to help their licensee and the public for the patients, how they can better inform their patients. We have those consent forms, and also we shared, with the students, with the other licensees. I'm just, want to see that is a lot is association, licensees, stakeholders step up in the place to lead in this. And thanks everyone for work on this. And thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mateki. I'd be interested to kind of hear from staff, because I think, you go through David's very thorough presentation and kind of noting some of these comments. I guess the question is kind of like, well, what now and what next? And so I know that our enforcement staff, the head of enforcement had just left, but I know that Christine has experience here and kind of has filled in, and Ben and Jay, also have, their own perspectives on this. So I would kind of throw this back to staff and just ask the question of, do we think that we as a board should agendize some, this was for discussion only, but some sort of action based on this to potentially recommend an update in the law or the regulations on informed consent, in light of any sort of enforcement cases that have come before us historically, as Ruben noted, and hearing some of the practitioners on the board kind of talk about differing kind of styles of getting informed consent from patients. I guess I would like to hear the perspective of Ben and Jay and Christine, frankly.
Certainly, Mr. President. Ben Bodie, Executive Officer. I'd be cautious about having the board call for new regulations or laws on this, as we see there's not much captured in the statutes and regulations for the other boards. And a number of the drivers for those other healing arts professionals are actually from the association. So there's an understanding at the profession level of what's going on that hasn't called those boards that oversee them to introduce these items into regulation. Best practices do carry a lot of weight, especially from standard of care perspectives, is where we're asking when we review an enforcement case, well, what was the standard of care? Was there a deviation here from the normal standard of care? And that standard of care is described by our subject matter experts, who are themselves acupuncturists. So I think it would be important to hear from our associations or our licensees as to, outside of our board members, of course, as to the best practices that are encouraged, shared, or held in this profession. Thank you. Jay?
Thank you. Again, just thank you, David, for your really, really, really thorough work on this one. To me, from a staff perspective, there's a couple of things to kind of tease out of the presentation. One is that acupuncture is regulated as a primary care practice. And so mirroring sort of what is done by the Med Board or different, chiropractic board, physical therapy along the thing would be, really, really wonderful guidance. The other thing is static kind of informed consents. Hey, I'm going to practice acupuncture and it sits in the chart, and you redo it. Often those start as malpractice insurance requirements or facility requirements along that line. The other piece to tease out is that informed consent is expected to be done verbal and dynamic along the way. So every time something's going on, you would want to stay in contact with a patient and change it. And because of clinical situations, that's necessary. If we hear the deeper part from the Med Board, they were recommending recommend certain informed consents for things like opioid, prescriptions, or certain, fertility kinds of issues that's going to impact the patient in the long term. So it's done in very special cases like that, but there's always the expectation that there is dynamic, informed consent going on the way. And then just lastly, in terms of enforcement, and Christine can speak up to this, to me, in my experience in the 6 years of the board, and I've seen a number of enforcement cases, I don't see informed consent as a driving problem in the issue. It's usually the behavior of the licensee, either behavior towards the patient that's inappropriate or fraud or something along that line, rather than they did a medical procedure that the patient didn't understand what was going to go on, and it had some kind of consequence. So that's my kind of off the cuff kind of review of this subject. I think it would really be good to follow Dr. Montechi's kind of pathway forward to have the profession together and come together as a group to make some recommendations as to what the current standard of care should be here. And so I'll stop there.
Thank you. Both of those comments are very helpful, Ben and Jay, and that makes sense to me. And why don't we hear from the public now and the community and what they think? So why don't we open this up for public comment?
The Q&A feature of WebEx is now open. If you'd like to make a comment on the informed consent practices discussion, you can put the word comment in the text field. The Q&A icon, it's usually at the lower right corner of your computer screen or behind the 3-dot other options screen if you're on the mobile device. We do have, and each commenter will have 3 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning. We have a request to comment from Ron Zaidman. Ron, I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Ron Zaidman, Five Branches University. Yes, we've been using a consent form both for our private appointments as well as for the appointments with our interns. And we receive guidance from our malpractice insurance. They want the malpractice insurance to be valid and useful. So they make recommendations and we follow them in order to keep ourselves safe and follow malpractice protocols. Yeah. So that's another source of information that is available to us, is from our malpractice insurance companies. Thank you.
And I do not see any other requests for public comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A feature?
Sure. I guess, I don't know if Neil Miller or anyone else from CalAtm was with us, but I was interested to hear from them. But, this isn't going to be the last time we talk about it. So, yeah, we can go ahead and close it. Thank you.
We also see representatives from some other associations as well in our audience.
Yeah, and that's fine. And if that's a good point. And if folks don't want to comment now, that's not a problem at all. but I was interested to kind of hear from, in light of the comments we heard from Dr. Matecki and Ben and Jay, I do think that, you know, the practice itself and in these organizations kind of taking the lead on this is probably the best thing. So for now, let's close it and then bring it back to the board. And look, we can discuss this more, but Ruben is again as the member who did agendize this. Is there any final kind of thoughts on going forward? I think Dr. Matecki had a good idea, and I think staff seems to agree. But is there anything that you'd like to see going forward for a future agenda item, or anything that we as a board should do?
No, I would like to see if there's a way that we could discuss this in a different manner that we cannot brought up here in the public. But is that possible?
You mean like a closed session item? You mean?
Yeah.
I'd have to defer to Fred Chan Yu. I mean, I have my own independent thoughts on that, but I think that would be difficult. But that's just my impression.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is Fred Chen, UDC legal counsel. If this is just to discuss whether the board should adopt any type of legislation or regulation as to informed consent, that's probably not authorized, you know, for a closed meeting session, because this is, I mean, I think the Open Meeting Act was conceived with the idea that the public should participate in this discussion as to how the board should proceed on a matter of importance here.
Okay, I understand that. That was basically one of the reasons why I thought maybe that way we don't get infringed, but I understand. Yeah, I don't have anything else. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, my impression of this is, you know, the kind of aligns with staff's thoughts that it doesn't seem like we should be proposing some sort of action or even having a conversation about proposing some sort of new law or regulation on this, but really kind of going back to the profession themselves to see if there's something that needs to be done from the stakeholders to make this more. One, is there a problem to be addressed, which, you know, I'm not sure there is, and two, you know, if there's a problem, how best to address it. And I think it's a helpful conversation that the board just had for the public, and we're always going to try to keep public health and safety at the forefront of what we do, and obviously informed consent is part of that. But from this discussion, I'm not quite sure the board necessarily needs to refer this to a committee for any additional work, unless a board member wants to do that, or really anything further at this point. I think this was a helpful exercise, though.
This is Member Kim. I've been serving in the enforcement committee several years, and I've seen a lot of cases, including the sexual harassment cases and all that. But as a regulating body, I think, you know, if you want to specify some things that you can do and you should do, or you cannot do, that's that's one approach to regulate and make the whole regulatory system functioning. But as far as this one, it seems like the system works with just the current system, current consent form regulation. You know, so we don't have to put extra thing, because nobody want to put their neck on their, you know, over the behavior, unprofessional conduct that will lead to them to lose their license, right? So this is about the whether the system works or not. So that's my opinion.
Thank you, Francisco. Ben, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Dr. Chen, we'll go to you next. Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Certainly. Just wanted to point out that as we had discussed, the industry tends to lead on this for the other healing arts boards or professions. And the situation we have in the acupuncture profession is that we don't have as high participation in professional associations by our licensees, and medical malpractice isn't required for our licensees. So the messaging for this may not be similar. So again, I think as you pointed out earlier, we're sharing with the public the state of affairs, and perhaps this can be seen as a call to action on the part of the associations and the licensees. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Chen, go ahead.
So yes, thank you for Mr. Ruben Osoro to sense and to observe a lot of problem in the medical practice field, including other, mainly I think other healthcare profession and as well as the acupuncture profession. I don't know if acupuncture profession has more this kind of lawsuit or problem, a violation than others, maybe average, maybe less, maybe average. So that's not the point. The point is Mr. Ron Sideman mentioned we already have informed consent. Yes, I know clearly malpractice insurance we give patients informed consent. Otherwise, if we have any problem, they will not cover the malpractice. So we do give the patient. But I read the content in the consent, mainly focus on the treatment, inform the patient what kind of treatment we will have to give them. So that's very clear. But about sexual harassment, this category, I think, since the board already going to do the medical ethics as required, mandatory education, so probably that will solve the problem. And as long as the association give continuous education every 2 years required, I think it will help. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments before we close out? Well, thank you. That very interesting discussion, and I appreciate David and the rest of the staff's work on that. We will move on. I know that item number 14 was pulled from the agenda. So, Mr. Bodea, do we want to go to item number 15?
Yes, please. Thank you. Item number 15 is setting the meeting calendar for the 2022 calendar year. And if you turn to the calendar page, recommendation is to hold meetings in March, June, September, and December. This would be quarterly. For March, recommendation is for the 24th and 25th. In June, the recommendation is for the 16th and 17th. In September, the recommendation is for the 15th and 16th. And in December, the recommendation is for 8th and 9th. And this year would be, as we discussed yesterday per SB 607's changes, our sunset reporting year. So we'll be working on that. And if there is a need to, because we have that meeting in September, we'll be able to review it there. But if there's a need to review the sunset report for approval again, prior to the December board meeting, we will hold a separate meeting just for the sunset report itself. Would these months be all right with the board members?
Thank you, Ben. I'm just reviewing these dates again.
Certainly.
So to be clear, the next meeting would be.
The recommendation is the March 24th, 25th.
Got it. Okay. I'm just making a note of this.
Mhm.
And board members, I'm sure everyone's kind of looking at their calendars right now. So March 24th, 25th. And then can you say the next, I'm looking at my calendar. Can you say the next group again? I apologize.
Then we have June 16th and 17th. Also September 15th and 16th. And December 8th and 9th.
This is a member Pateki.
Go ahead.
Okay, I just want to know, Ben, if this probably will be in-person meeting, right, for president?
Great question, Member Mateki. The legislation that extended the remote meetings is going to expire towards the end of January. So we won't know if we will be allowed to continue having WebEx meetings, or if we will be if legislation will be introduced to allow for a hybrid format, or if we have to go to in-person. At the moment, with no legislation standing to extend it, the March meeting and future meetings would be in person.
Thank you.
That's a good question. Thank you, Dr. Mateki. These dates generally look good for me, and subject to other board members. I do think the only one thing I want to discuss as a board and with staff is I understand that we're blocking out 2 days for each of these subsequent meetings, so a total of 8 days for four meetings. I do think that I wonder if for efficiency, maybe 2 of these meetings potentially could be 2-day meetings, and 2 of them can be 1-day meetings. And so we would have to kind of, plan out efficiently and strategically to make sure that on the 1-day meetings, we'll have enough time. But I do think with, sunset review, we'll probably need, 1 to 2 2-day meetings. But especially if these are in-person meetings and with everyone's work schedules, I do think for board members, maybe having 1-day meetings is more doable, with the idea that we can be doing committee work virtually in between then to kind of supplement and help with some stuff that the board might not necessarily need to do. So any thoughts on that, Ben? I mean, I think, frankly, if the September, I don't know if the September meeting would be a 2-day and the December would be a 2-day, and March and June would be 1-day, or, you do March 1-day, June 2-day. I'm very agnostic on it, but, we could just block out the 2 days now, and then when things get closer, just distill it down to 1 day for a couple of these as well. But I do think, from my perspective, professionally and just trying to juggle everything, 1-day meetings are easier, but happy to kind of hear more thoughts and discussion on that.
Definitely. We can look at doing 1-day meetings, especially if we're open to having committee meetings outside of that range. Because our committees are at 2-member meetings, they're not subject to the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. So we would be able to even post that through the web, as opposed to having to in person. Legal counsel, please correct me if I'm wrong there. So I think doing so would open us up to the possibility of 1-day meetings. When we were at 1-day meetings before, we did tend to run long. So it was not unusual to be out after 5. That's my only concern, although, however, we can go ahead and see what we can pack in for 2022. I'm open to that. And then I would just recommend just holding on to the Friday date. And then if we're on a flow basis, as we come up to the meeting and identify the agenda, President Harabidian and I can work on determining if it's a 1 or 2-day meeting that we need that specific time.
Yeah, I agree. I think that sounds right. Like, we can even block out the 2 days, and then just when we get closer, it can just be a 1-day. That sounds good. Dr. Chen, go ahead.
I raise my hand. Okay, I didn't mean it, but
it's okay.
Yeah, but I agree. If the agenda looks light, then we can make it 1 day. started earlier, finish a little later. If we have something review, there's a lot of item like a legislation, a lot of review we need to the bills we need to review, then we need probably 2 days. I agree.
Thank you. Anyone else have any problems with these dates? I think we can, I mean, these dates seem like they work for everyone unless I hear anything otherwise. So why don't we go ahead, and do you need a motion for this? Sorry, Fred, do you need a motion to approve these dates?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
I think as you do have the authority as the board president to establish a calendar.
Thank you. So why don't we go ahead and block off these dates and just note the conversation that when we get closer to the date, we'll determine whether a 1 day or 2 day meeting.
Excellent. Thank you kindly, Mr. President.
Although before we do, I would maybe ask the public for comments.
Yes. Yeah. Good. Sorry about that. Go ahead. Let's open up for public comment. I forgot to do that.
And this is the moderator. We've opened up the Q&A feature of WebEx for public comment. If you've got any input on the calendar for 2022, you can locate the question mark inside a square on the lower right corner of your WebEx screen. We do have one request for comment from Neil Miller. Neil, I will send you a request to unmute your microphone and you will have 3 minutes to speak.
Neil Miller from Cal ATMA. Regarding the meetings, if they're going to be in person, could you pick what city that they're going to be in? It makes it a lot easier for us to make reservations ahead of time if we're going to fly in and around the state to have that information. And my other comment is on having 1 or 2 day meetings. There's a lot more things that need to be discussed. There are a number of agenda items since you've been on the board, Dr. Harbedian, that are brought up and they're just unaddressed. So as we go to the next agenda item or 2 items up for looking for agenda items, future agenda items, I would hope that we could be cognizant of so many of the issues that just keep sliding on and on and on that are still undone from even before you were here, Mr. Harbedian, that issues have been brought up for discussion for agenda items and they just haven't made it to the schedule. So think about the 2 days of meetings and the committee meetings and actually getting a lot more done on a committee meeting than in 1 day and trying to rush through it so that you're actually getting some feedback from the consumer and the public, as opposed to getting 3 minutes to make a quick comment and there's no real discussion. There's no utilization at the meeting from the public or the consumer. Thank you.
And I see no other requests for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A public comment feature?
Please. Thank you.
Welcome.
And thank you for that, Neil, for that comment. And with that, I think we've established a calendar. And yeah, to be clear to everyone, we are open to 2 day meetings, and obviously if it's necessary, especially in light of future agenda items that may come up, we're happy to do that. So nothing is going to be set in stone as to that point, 1 day or 2 day meeting. But I think that these four sets of dates for now make sense. And I do think, if we are going to be meeting in person, in the past, before the pandemic, we tried to kind of go throughout the state, Northern and Southern California. We never really, since I've been on the board, done a Central California location, but we will definitely have the physical location, to the extent that there is one, noticed well in advance. So thanks for that. We can move on to item number 16. And at this point, we're soliciting public comment for items not on the agenda, and I assume I assume that we can just open it up for public comment. Thank you.
That's right.
Exactly. Yes, the Q&A feature is now open. If anyone has suggestions for future agenda items, you're certainly welcome to use the Q&A feature of WebEx. That's the question mark inside a box at the lower right corner of your screen, or from a mobile device, behind the 3-dot other options is the Q&A icon. Type the word comment, and we will send you a request to unmute. Each speaker will have 3 minutes.
Point of
And
clarification, public comment is for items not on the agenda. Future agenda items will be the next item.
My apologies, not on the agenda. We do have a request to speak from Neil Miller. Neil, I'll go ahead and request it to unmute, and you'll have 3 minutes. And Neil, are you able to unmute again?
Unmute. Unmute? Am I
There you
muted?
go.
Okay, Neil Miller
We can
from
hear you.
Neil Miller from Cal Atma. Ben took my first comment regarding future items and not on the agenda. But I was wondering if the format was going to be for items not on the agenda versus hearing specifically from organizations. It seems to be a change. And if there are any other changes that the chair seems to feel would be better at streamline. He's been on the committee for a while. I don't know if this is going to be an ongoing change where we're not going to hear from associations, which is usually at the end of the meeting. And future agenda and for agenda items not on the agenda, it was usually at the beginning of the meeting. So as we look at agenda items and schedule our time, I wanted to know if this is going to be an ongoing change, that it would be at the end of the meeting, and it would not be specific to listening to the professional associations, but that this was just a general comment from the public and anybody could come at this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, so I know that we agendize public comment for items not on the agenda for every meeting. And I do know that over the past 4 to 5 years that I've been here, we do have some meetings, and I just don't remember it being every meeting, but some meetings where we do have a specific item for conversation where we hear from the associations. I don't remember that being every meeting, so I don't think that the fact that there isn't an agenda item here means much. Because we always do love to hear from the associations and the different organizations throughout the meeting on all the items. And it should be, noted that notwithstanding the 3-minute limitation, we always do hope that the associations are kind of actively participating on all the discussion items and not just a specific one calling for their feedback. So I think, Ben, you can speak to this more. But I don't think that the lack of an agenda item today means that we're not going to have it in the future where we hear from the associations and organizations.
Yes, and the items, the agenda item, public comment on items not on the agenda, is a perfect opportunity for associations to provide updates on their actions if that is not agendized explicitly for them. But ultimately, the consumer associations, when we agendized it for associations, consumer associations could also share, and it was really just another public comment period at that time. So moving these into associations can report during this agenda item. Thank you.
And this is the moderator. Shall I close this feature in lieu of future agenda items coming next?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to item number 17, future agenda items. Board members Any particular items that you want to be seen discussed, whether it be in committee first or by the board? Please let me know if you'd want to make a comment at this point.
This is Member Kim. So, how are we gonna prepare for the stakeholders meeting, or are you gonna discuss it next meeting, or I want to know the procedure.
Well, it's a good point, because we already called for the stakeholder meeting to be agendized. So in my mind, it's going to come before the board in due course, whether it's next meeting or the meeting after that. But we can ask staff if their understanding is any different. But I don't think you need to bring that up here, because we already agendized it. But Ben, am I wrong, or is that the understanding?
That is the understanding, and it would be a separate meeting from a board meeting.
Okay. And so in terms of scheduling that, do you need us, is it going to be, to Francisco's question, we'll just hear from you whenever it gets scheduled, or do you need the board's help in actually scheduling it?
Yes, I'll be reaching out to you, Mr. President, as well as the committee members. It's always good to have several board members in attendance at a stakeholder meeting. Board member attendance is not required, but it does help for the board members to be there to listen to the stakeholders. They're being virtually or in person, and we're going to work with Solid to help facilitate the meeting, as we have in the past. So we're going to need to schedule some things. And at the moment, with the pandemic still a pandemic, the in-person meeting would be a challenge. So we're going to see how it unfolds before we start scheduling, because we do want participation. And as our public shared earlier, the in-person participation is more welcome, or at least constructive. So we'll be in touch for sure.
Great, thank you. Francisco, does that answer
Thank
your
you.
question?
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Chen, go ahead.
I wonder when will be this stakeholder meeting held, and after this stakeholder meeting, will the state meeting result be reported to next board meeting? That is maybe if something come out constructive or productive, then maybe it's necessary for the board to further discussion or make some decision. This one item, and another item. Since we discussed the informed consent, and so I just mentioned the board already discussed before the formal meeting about the not that we give, but association or the continuing education should include ethical education every 2 years. So should we encourage the licensees to more actively involve this, to receive this education? So I hope they hear this information and they will do it. So what's the requirement? I don't this to Mr. Padilla. Is this in law already or not yet? The every 2 year ethics education.
The regulation on the CE ethics requirement is still under work, and we are hoping to have that for board review soon. Its current status, as reported by David yesterday, is it's with legal counsel and staff. So we're doing the final work on it. The board has approved that language, and we are hoping to be able to notice it soon.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So doesn't sound like any future agenda items. specific items have been brought forward. So we can open it from the board members, but let's open this up for public comment.
And we have opened up the public comment, the Q&A feature of WebEx. If you would like to suggest a future agenda item, you may click on the question mark inside a box to open the Q&A feature. If you're on a mobile device, it is behind the 3-dot other options. And we do have a request for comment from Neil Miller. Neil, I'll send you the request to unmute. And you will have 3 minutes.
Neil Miller from Cal APMA. As we discuss future agenda items, you've now been on the board for a couple of years, Mr. Harbeedy, and you've seen a lot of future agenda items being brought forth that never make it to the agenda. And so as we try to get new agenda items to each meeting, what would you like on the next meeting? It might be to our advantage to take a look at what we've been talking about from the time since you got here, and from the time before that, and the time before that, and all the way back to the Little Hoover Commission, about some of the unanswered issues that still need to be addressed. I know it's a fine line between you don't do legislation, you enforce the regulations of the law, but there has to be some sort of communication between what we do here and what the Little Hoover Commission recommended, and then getting that message over to the legislature. So some of the items that we brought up were the bleeding and the therapeutic blood withdrawal, Asian massage and manual therapy, which we both had a chance to speak on. But then what do we do with it? How do we get that message over to the legislature? It's on the agenda. We discuss it or get a presentation made, but then there's no follow-up, no discussion, and no enlightenment to the legislators to be able to better protect the consumer by some of the ideas that are brought up, or to better serve the consumer as well as protect the consumer. The idea of lasers and lights and injection therapy have been brought up several times and haven't been on the agenda. And I would like to see on the agenda, we would like to see on the agenda something that discusses doctoral level education and the masters based on the results from the occupational analysis and the trend within the profession. And should there be some sort of legislation that regulates this? And if you have an idea on that by having a public meeting, then we can go forth with someone in the business and professions committees to let them know what's happening so that we improve on the communication between the regulatory agency and the legislative agency to better serve the consumer and the profession. So take a look at what's been done before, Ben, and maybe present some of that stuff to Mr. Harabedian as he prepares to make the next agenda.
30 seconds.
So we can start to clean up some of this stuff. And again, I thank you again for your service as our new chair, and Dr. Mataki for the service that you've done. And I know that you're going into closed session for Ben. It's not on the agenda, but I think he and his staff have done a great job. So I wanted to make public comment on that. That's it.
And we do have a raised hand from attendee Lei Zhang. Lei, I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone, or if you're on a telephone device, you can press *6 to unmute yourself, and you'll have 3 minutes. Yes, Lei Zhang.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to share my opinion. My name is Lei Zhang. I'm president of Academy of Integrative Chinese Medicine and Pain Management. And because I'm working today, so I didn't heard all of them. But first, I want to share my. I think the doctor degree is very important for us, and because right now there are so many other health field person they want to join to use acupuncture to treat the patient. So like a chiropractor, physical therapy, and there are other people they want to get in our field. So I think it's very important. We need to prove our professional. Like for example, for in my office is in Fullerton, and I treat patient. There are lots of patients from other MD doctor refer to me. Before they refer the patient to me, they come to my office, talk to me, ask me a lot of questions. And I think if we didn't do our best to prove our professional, so I don't think the MD they want to refer patient to us. And also we can learn more. We can treat more patient. We can have a same level to talk with the MD. Also, the patient will trust us more than right now. We are just acupuncturists. And thank you very much.
And I see no further requests for, oh, yes, my apologies, Philip Yang. I see this requested to speak. I would going to send you an unmute request, and you will have 30 minutes. I'm sorry, 3 minutes.
Yeah, this is Philip Yang, president of California University, Silicon Valley, and also representing AACMA. We, a couple of days ago, we discussed about this topic, and we know the importance of raising our education level to doctor's degree, because that's the only way we can compare with other professionals. And also, in our profession, we do need to strengthen our education, and especially the clinical trainings. Maybe one of the ways is we don't have the residency program, so we may get a residency program as the extension education of the master's program. And another way is as a title. We don't have the doctor's title. We should get the doctor's title after we are qualified, educated. So the doctor's program is very important, especially for most of the graduates from master's degree. When they all get a doctor's program degree, then the whole profession level will be improved. Thank you.
And I do not see any further requests for comment on future agenda items. Shall I close the Q&A?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just to circle back with staff on some of these comments. First of all, Neil, yeah, we thank you for the comments, and we agree that we think staff's doing a great job as well. So thank you for that endorsement, Ben and his staff, which we agree with. I do think that there's a couple things that Neil mentioned, and then the second two speakers. I definitely have been hearing about the bloodletting and the lights and lasers for a long time. I'm sorry, are we still open for public comment? I think we should have closed it. Okay, perfect. And I think it seems like we've discussed this multiple times, and I just want to kind of remind myself because my memory's a little foggy. But to the extent that members of the public are asking, and it's Neil Miller who's really the one that's asked for it over and over again about some sort of action on bloodletting and lasers and lights and other things that he didn't necessarily mention in particular here. I want to know from staff's perspective, I mean, what we can do here, because I definitely don't think that anyone on the board is trying to ignore Neil or what he's asking for, but I just don't know exactly what staff can do. Maybe sitting down, and I think you've already done this, but have you sat down with CalAtma and talked to Neil about addressing any of this stuff in particular? And if so, can you just remind the board kind of where we ended up on that?
Oh, Mr. President, this is Fred Chen, you legal counsel. The question is related to whether the need of potentially putting these items on future agenda items, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Because I just don't, yeah, to be clear, Fred, I'm asking staff, is there anything that we should be agendizing at this point or not? And I know that these items have come up before.
I think that's fine as long as it's related to future agenda items.
Great. Ben, are you there?
I am here. Yeah. So with this in particular, in terms of the future agenda items, we have brought them up. We have discussed, provided an opportunity for the profession to show the board these procedures that they're asking to be included in scope. I think that the board's next point of being able to participate in providing their opinion on such an item is if it comes up in a legislative bill. These things aren't regulated. These wouldn't be in, the scope wouldn't be expanded through regulation. The scope has to be expanded through legislation. Now, the board is open to hearing on these items, but I'm not quite sure what the additional work would be on these items. We could look at other items that haven't been addressed that Mr. Miller has brought to the board's attention before. But my understanding is that the board president does not have to agendize all items that the public is requesting for. Not that you wouldn't want to, but that it is within the president's authority to choose the agenda as they see fit to address the board's business. So the board can definitely listen to the profession as to what it's going through, what it's experiencing. Again, items for not on the agenda was the opportunity for an association to provide its update. But it is at the discretion of the president to choose which items.
Yeah. No,
Did I answer your question fully?
Yeah, it did. Thank you. Undoubtedly. Okay. No, I definitely agree that it's at the discretion of the board to agendize future agenda items. I think that right now, I just want to make sure that, you know, we're not somehow flouting, you know, critical things that should be agendized. And I think, Neil, if you're hearing this, I think, why don't you just email me and copy Ben, and to the extent you think that certain items are not being agendized for future discussion, why don't you write that to me, and I can discuss with staff. And I think that's probably the most efficient way of going about it. In terms of a couple comments about the doctoral level and the doctorate discussion, I don't, to be clear, I'm not sure how that falls within the board's purview and charge. So I mean, I'm not inclined to agendize anything because I'm not sure the board is the one that would be making any sort of decisions on whether doctorate level education was promoted or came into being. I'm just not sure. Maybe I'm misunderstanding, you know, our role in that process. But it seems to be outside the scope of the board. But is staff's understanding different?
I'm sorry, Mr. President. I had a message coming in from our DCA representative waiting to get in to the closed session item. Could you please repeat your question?
Oh yeah, sorry. No, we've heard a couple comments here during this agenda item about future agenda items related to doctoral or doctorate level
education. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm just not sure. I'm not sure that falls upon the board, but I just wanted to defer to staff to see if, I'm not sure what a future agenda item would look like to discuss doctorate level education.
I agree, and in my opinion, and we can definitely confer with legal counsel and the department to see if there are different practices elsewhere. But at this point, there isn't a massive threat to public harm that would mandate the board take up the education requirement and therefore demand or make a request of the legislature that the degree requirement be instituted. The profession is more than welcome to take that on as a standard, as the legislature has expressed. The board must use the Accreditation Commission for Acupuncture and Herbal Medicine, and therefore, and as well as have unapproved curriculum. Our curriculum does not say that it has to be a doctorate or a master's program. So ultimately, the industry does have the ability to take on this opportunity, if it so wishes, to require that all acupuncturists be PhDs. It does present the possibility of a barrier to entry into the profession, which has been a challenge for the legislature to accept as well. So I feel that the industry would have a task before itself to show the legislature as well as the board that it would require this kind of education, this degree. Obviously, we have a 3,000-hour education, which is higher than most master's programs and is much closer to a doctoral program already. So the board approves training programs, curriculums that have both degrees taught at their programs, and the board does not look at that degree unless there is a complaint from a public member, from the public, stating that this individual is holding themselves to be a doctor by using the title, at which point we investigate to see if they have that degree, because it's not required.
Mr. President, Fred Chan, DCA Legal Counsel. I mean, at this point right now, I mean, the question is whether we should include this as a future agenda item. I mean, if I mean, certainly within your authority to agendize this item in terms of examining whether it just falls within the scope of the board to do those things. But as of right now, I think the discussion should just be contained to whether you know, this should be on the agenda for future meetings or not, and we can, I guess, go from there.
Yep. No, agreed. I mean, I think that's what Ben and I are trying to ascertain, and it sounds like both of us agree that it shouldn't. So I think based on Ben's feedback, we're not going to agendize that for future discussions. So any other comments before we close out this item and go into closed session from the board members?
This is Member Kim. I think you know, the profession or associations or other, they can agenda. I mean, they can discuss on this this issue. Then maybe board can take a position on this, but this one has to go through the legislative procedure. So you know, if unless we have some time, maybe we can put it in the agenda and discuss it. But I think we've been having 2-day meetings, so maybe let's see how it develops among the profession, and you know, maybe they become an issue, then we can have it on discuss on the meeting officially. That's my suggestion.
Thanks, Francisco.
This is Member Chen. Thank you very much for the stakeholders, Mr. Neil Miller, and as well as Lei Zhang, Philip Yang, and other stakeholders come to the board meeting, give us a lot of commentary, and also inform us what's going on in the profession. But I heard all the discussion, and so any legislation should come from the profession. So if the profession can united have one voice and come to the legislation, and the board be informed, the board can take position. Thank you for your information about bloodletting, injection, to laser to expand the scope of practice that the request from the profession, and also doctor degree level education as entry level for licensure. So we heard from you. Anyway, thank you for informing us.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Chen. And seeing no other comments, we'll close this item. And at this point, for the public's knowledge, item number 18 is a closed session item to do the executive officer's annual performance evaluation. So I'll defer to staff and legal counsel and tech as to how this is going to work. Do we as board members stay here and the public is excluded, or how is this going to work?
This is the moderator. Yes, the board members will stay here. We will go into what's called a practice session, which means anyone who is still in it, the public attendees will see a blank screen and they will not hear the discussion. At that point, you may discuss whatever you like, and generally you adjourn from your closed session and simply end the meeting.
Mr. President, this is Fred Chen, UDC Legal Counsel.
Hi, Fred.
I'm going to step away from the closed session as well because I work very closely with the executive officer. But however, I will be available if you have any questions during the closed session. So I will be I will have my eyes glued to the computer screen.
Oh, no problem. I appreciate that, Fred. And I do see that Nicole's here. Hi, Nicole. How are you?
Good afternoon. Hi. Yes, I'm here, and I would ask that all board staff to leave the closed session too.
Right.
And as far as the control of the closed session, and is it something you will transfer over to the board president?
I'm under the understanding that I will be hosting the closed session. We are not in closed session yet. I will make an announcement, but then I will remove my headphones so I'm not listening. And that way, if anyone needs to contact me, they will use the Microsoft Teams chat to let me know that they need me to join the meeting.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Great. Thank you. And
So
thank you.
shall I move us into closed session now?
Not yet. Sorry, this is a member Mateki.
Yeah.
I still see there's a lot of attendees here.
We haven't gone into closed session yet. Yeah, that's right, Dr. Mateki. We haven't gone yet. But before we do, I want to be cognizant of people needing breaks at this point, board members. And Nicole, thank you for just showing up. I don't want to delay anything, but we've been going now for almost 2 hours or so, I believe. So maybe I'm wrong, but I think we probably need a little bit of a break here before we go into this session, if that's okay.
And I apologize. I understand break is necessary. I do have another closed session for another board that was supposed to start at 1, and I've been waiting in here, so I asked them to delay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I understand more agenda items. Sometimes we cannot pin down the exact time. But I am happy to just quickly go over the process. That will not take more than 10 minutes. Then board members can take all the breaks necessary. And then I can go to the other closed session where board member can reconvene with the instruction provided and proceed with the evaluation. Would that work for everyone?
Yeah, let's do that, Nicole. We want to be respectful of your time. So what?
Mr. President, sorry, this is Fred again. I think there's a member of the public who has a comment. I believe they have their hand up.
That's correct. There is a hand raised, although it was, I believe, raised after public comment was closed. I'll leave that to the chair.
No, we can hear from him. That's fine. But Nicole, to your point, yeah, let's hear from this and then plan on going to a closed session so we can hear from Nicole, get instructions, and then we can take our break and proceed. So.
All right.
So
So,
we can hear from Ann York Lee.
and York Lee, I've sent you a request to unmute your microphone. Wonderful.
Okay,
And I'll know-
so
Okay, there you go.
I heard a good conversation, and I believe a lot of subject will continue discussion. It will be ongoing discussion. But I do see we miss one factor. And right now, the school only compete for how many students pass the license exam. But we do not have any information for the public. For those students who get a license and graduate from the acupuncture school, how many of them pay the federal loan? From the payback rate, we can also know how good, how competitive the school train the licensed acupuncturist in the health market. Okay, and without the internal combination, students spend a lot of hours and the board spend a lot of time to discuss how to improve. But I think internal competition among the school, we should announce or publish what is the student federal loan payback rate among the approval school. And I think that will be helpful before the student select the school and for their educational journey. That is my input for the board to consider.
Great, thank you, Mr. Lee. We'll take that into consideration. Appreciate the comment. At this point, we're going to go. Let's go into closed session, and we'll hear from Nicole, and then we will. We as a board will proceed.
Agreed. So one moment while I begin the practice session. And the recording has been paused.